All right, everyone. We have one more bill to get through today, please. We've been doing pretty well. We've gotten a lot accomplished. All right. Now the chair would like to recognize Representative Costa-Howard on House Floor Amendment number 2 to House Bill 2827. We're going to take a quick look at witness slips. We have 300, on the amendment, we have 307 indicated as no position. We have 36,867 opponents and 271 proponents. I'm sure we'll all understand we are not going to read those into the record right now. Representative, if you would like to make an opening, oh, I'm sorry. I had forgotten. I have also received another letter from Speaker Welch. We are replacing permanent member Representative Hirschauer with temporary member Representative Costa-Howard. Clerk, if you could please just update that in our roll. Representative, if you would like to present changes in the amendment.
Thank you, Chair Mussman. Today I'm just going to highlight a few because I'm sure we have lots of questions, and in the interest of time, I'm going to just give a few of the highlights for House Floor Amendment number 2 for House Bill 2827. The amendment addresses some of the issues and concerns that were raised by both proponents and opponents to the bill. For example, we've rewritten the findings from the original bill. We have tightened language regarding definitions such as educational portfolio, and again, changed some language regarding adequate education. We have made changes to the declaration notification form. It also, in addition to removing some language that stated not limited to, so it's very prescriptive about what information will need to complete that form. But we also made the change of that form being submitted both online or in person to our regional office of education or the intermediate service center, and not directly to the school district. We have also in section 55 clarified educational portfolio as part of the investigation for 10 business days. And at the request of the non-public schools, we have changed, I believe it might be on page 23, regarding the private schools, and we accepted their suggested language regarding not having to provide a full list, but only to either confirm or deny whether a named student is enrolled or attending. Those are some of the highlights, and I am prepared. I know we have 2 witnesses, 1 for each side, and then I will answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a preference for how we go in order? I believe that we have Carmen Longoria Green on behalf of the Coalition for Responsible Home Education on Zoom. Carmen, if you would like to take yourself off mute, state your name for the record, and proceed with your statement.
Yes, thank you. My name is Carmen Longoria Green. I am the board chair for the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, or CRHE. We are the only organization in the country founded and run by people who were actually homeschooled, and we exist to advocate for changes to the law to protect homeschooled kids. I'm here to urge the committee to vote yes on HB 2827. There is an urgent need to ensure that homeschooled children in Illinois are safe and are being educated. Illinois trails the country in terms of its homeschooling laws. In terms of protections for kids, Illinois' peer states are Texas, Oklahoma, and Idaho. And this lack of protections results in serious harm to kids. There's Alexandra Bethard, who was homeschooled in Illinois and, in her words, never received a formal education. Instead, her days were spent cooking, cleaning, and essentially being a second mom to her younger siblings. There's Whitney Harrison, who was homeschooled in Illinois from 3rd through 8th grade. When she finally got into a public high school, she had the equivalent of a 3rd grade math education. And there's Casey Pickett. She was homeschooled in Illinois by parents who believed that women did not need to be educated to the same extent as men. They told her too much knowledge isn't good for a female's brain. So they denied her access to higher level math and other subjects that she would need if she ever wanted to go to college. These stories are not unique. I can tell you, as someone who has homeschooled myself for 12 years, just next door in Missouri, that when there are no legal protections in place, which is the case in Illinois, there is no floor for how bad the homeschooling experience can be. And that reality is borne out by common sense. Think of the most irresponsible person you know, or the most unstable, or just someone who's just not able to do a follow through. Daily, grueling dedication to their child's education. Some people can do it and do it well. I have seen it. But it's just as true that many people can't, even if they have the best of intentions. That's simply a fact. And on top of that, it is also a fact that some parents don't have good intentions at all. Some parents use homeschooling as a facade, a disguise, to hide their children from the teachers, coaches, other students, and other parents that their children would encounter in school. CRHE maintains a database called Homeschooling's Invisible Children, where we track cases of severe abuse and neglect in homeschool settings. We have documented hundreds of these cases, including cases in Illinois. In fact, ProPublica published an article just last year describing how Illinois' lax homeschooling laws allow parents who have nefarious intent to hide their crimes. It is a fact that Illinois children have died because there is no mechanism in place under current law to make sure that a child is removed from school to actually homeschool them, not just to hide them. Homeschool laws should not be built on the fantasy that every single parent is a good parent. Everyone in this room knows that isn't true. We only need to turn on the evening news to see the type of child abuse and neglect that adults are capable of committing. It is time for Illinois law to reflect the reality of homeschooled kids' lived experiences. That reality is that homeschool kids can be abused and they can be educationally neglected. The law should have a response to that. HB 2827 rises to this occasion. You have heard, I know, from many homeschooling parents who tell you that the sky is falling with this bill. Homeschooling in Illinois will be gutted, according to them, but that is false. More than that, that's a narrative being pushed by a multi-million-dollar lobbying group that makes its money by frightening homeschooling parents into thinking that homeschooling is about to be banned at every turn. The reality is that HB 2827 still leaves homeschooling in Illinois less regulated than it is in incredibly pro-homeschooling states like Florida, Georgia, Carolinas, and Louisiana. After HB 2827 is passed, homeschooling in Illinois will still be less regulated than it is in those states. And HB 2827 puts in place common sense changes. First, parents will have to notify the ROE once a year, let them know that they're going to be homeschooling their child that year. This notification requirement is found in 38 other states. Second, parents will need to maintain a portfolio of the child's work. This provision is helpful in two ways. First, it provides significant encouragement to the parent to stay on task with the child's education. I was homeschooled in Missouri, and that state has a portfolio requirement just like this one. I can tell you from my personal experience that this legal requirement ensured that my parents and others kept a log of their children's education, and it ensured lesson planning throughout the school year that would not otherwise have happened actually took place. Second, this portfolio is critical to ensure that there is a material on hand for determining whether a child is being educationally neglected. This is a practical, common sense requirement that other states have adopted. And third, the current version of the bill lays out precisely how a truancy officer will carry out an investigation into educational neglect in a homeschool setting. There is currently a gaping loophole in Illinois law. If someone calls in with a concern that a child who is purportedly being homeschooled actually isn't receiving an education, there is no mechanism in place to respond. The fact is that a parent claiming to homeschool can just say, I'm homeschooling, and slam the door in the truancy officer's face, and nothing further is going to be done to check in on whether that child's receiving an education. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I've heard from people who were homeschooled as kids about how they thought, finally, things are going to change. Things are going to get better because a family member, or an older, now adult sibling had contacted the authorities about the educational neglect that was happening. All for, in the end, nothing to happen at all. This aspect of Illinois law must change. There needs to be a process in place, spelled out in the law, for how to handle reports of educational neglect in a homeschool setting. HB 2827 rightly creates this process. On top of that, CRHE has determined through its research that educational neglect in a homeschool setting is often comorbid with other forms of abuse and neglect. This means that, in addition to uncovering educational neglect, the process set up by HB 2827 will also help identify other forms of physical abuse and neglect in a homeschool setting. And that's critical. Homeschooled students are unique in that they are not seen by the teachers, coaches, other students, and other parents that they would encounter in school. So the primary mechanism that our society uses for identifying cases of child abuse, which is namely, we trust our mandatory reporters and other adults in a child's life to say something if they see something, that mechanism doesn't exist for homeschool kids if their parents decide to isolate them. So it is important for there to be a mechanism in place, again, spelled out in the law, for identifying abuse and neglect in homeschool settings. I am a homeschool alum. I was homeschooled for 12 years. I am speaking on behalf of the thousands of homeschool alumni the CRHE represents. The modern homeschooling movement is now almost 40 years old. And the products of that movement, homeschool alumni like myself, well, we've grown up now, and we're able to tell you what it is actually like to be homeschooled. And we can tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. We are begging you to listen to us. We are telling you there is a problem with current law, and that problem needs to be fixed. HB 2827 rises to the occasion and addresses serious gaps in Illinois law. I urge you to vote yes on HB 2827. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Butler? If you would like to approach the table, state your name for the record, and then go ahead and proceed with your testimony.
So my name is Pastor Chris Butler, and we were both hoping to address the committee, but we're told that only one of us would be able to. And so I won or lost the coin toss, however we want to look at that. So I give you my greeting and good morning to the chair and to all the distinguished members of this committee. I am Pastor Chris Butler. I am a homeschool dad of 6. I am the senior pastor of Ambassador Church, serving the city of Chicago and the South Suburban community of South Holland. And perhaps most luckily, I get to be the husband of the incredible woman sitting next to me, Aziza Butler. I'm here today to voice my strong opposition to House Bill 2827 and its proposed amendment number 002. The last time I got a chance to sit in this committee room, this incredible woman next to me, Aziza, sat before this committee and raised concerns about the bill in its original form. Concerns that if passed into law, this bill would demonize and criminalize homeschool families. That it would indeed overburden existing public schools. And perhaps most importantly, that it would significantly hinder a budding movement of parent and community-led education in Black and Latino communities. This is a movement that I know well. This is a movement that I am seeing grow up in my church and in the communities that I serve. And it is about this movement that I particularly want to speak to this committee today. This movement is not 40 years old. This movement does not have million-dollar organizations behind it. This movement is a grassroots movement of people desperate to save their children from schools and a school system that has failed a generation. I am here today as somebody who grew up in Chicago public schools. I am here today sitting next to somebody who taught in Chicago's public schools, and we too have grown up, and we too have something to say about the education that we received, and it is why people in our generation have stepped up and said we must do something different. I'm here today because, as amended, this bill still concerns me where that movement is concerned. Under Amendment number 002, Section 30 creates a rebuttable presumption that homeschool students are not truant if and only if a homeschool notification form was submitted. This still leaves parents, in my opinion, subject to Illinois' problematic criminal truancy laws if the form is not filed. And again, we serve the community of people who will not hear about this from the existing homeschool listserv, and there is no money in this bill to educate our communities that they are even subject to these rules. In another place throughout the bill, the threats of immediate criminal penalties have been replaced with truancy investigations and referrals to the state's attorney's office. I do not need to tell the distinguished members of this committee that the state's attorney's office is a criminal prosecutor. Replacing criminal penalties with criminal referrals is little comfort to that single mother on the south side of Chicago who has seen in homeschooling a glimmer of hope for her child, but wonders if the public system that has been funded to fail her precious little one is going to freely give him up without a fight. Amendment 002 contains new language that to me is deeply concerning. You'll find these words on page 40 of the amendment. Quote, the truant officer or county truant officer notified of a homeschool violation of section 30 of the Homeschool Act shall meet with the child or children complained of and make an initial determination whether there is cause to start a truancy investigation. I'll say this again. Meet with the child to determine if there is a cause. If a truancy officer can separate a minor child from his parent for a so-called meeting, is that parent not being treated like a criminal? If a truancy officer can gain entry to a family's home without a warrant, whether welcomed or unwelcomed, is that family not being treated like criminals who have forfeited their rights? There can be no doubt that this bill, as amended, still lays the groundwork for a homeschool to prison pipeline. And that is something that none of us should take lightly. But Amendment 002 goes further than that. Goes further than the original bill, in that it not only attacks homeschooling families, it seeks to undermine the networks of communities and resources that support homeschoolers and help them find success. Organizations and communities like We School that my wife leads. Section 15 of the bill on page 3 creates a draconian new definition of homeschool to mean a program, quote, a program where instruction is provided in a student's home environment and which may have more than one student so long as the student in the homeschool are members of the same household. It goes further to specifically state that homeschool does not mean a group of 2 or more households who provide full-time instruction under an agreement. This definition introduces a massive amount of uncertainty and precarity around the legal status of organizations like We School and hundreds of other co-ops, micro schools, and innovative learning communities that are growing up all over our communities. Do those organizations have to become register as non-public schools? Do those parents participating in those programs lose all of their rights? Are their children considered chronically truant because they are working together to educate their children? The question here is, if this legislation is about protecting children from abusive situations, as the proponents have suggested, what is the logic of coercing families to retreat from community into their homes, retreat from spaces where they would interact with other children, with adults outside of the home, and even come in contact with mandated reporters in churches and in park districts and in other shared spaces? I continue to be concerned about the administrative burden that this bill places on our public schools. Some adjustments have been made, but these public schools are still being tasked with the creation, distribution, processing, and maintenance of this new form that tens of thousands of families will be bringing. The district is also charged to perform portfolio assessment. Now, I'm somebody who, in the early part of my career, spent a long time trying to move us away from standardized testing to portfolio-style assessment. But we have no robust system in place to do portfolio-style assessment. There is no new funding allotted in this bill to support our public school system in taking on these responsibilities. But again, Amendment 2 goes further. Not only do local school districts and the State Board of Education get saddled with these new administrative responsibilities, the new amendment will add unnecessary caseloads to state's attorney's offices. If you live in Cook County like me, you would rather have the state's attorney investigating and prosecuting much more consequential crime. This will balloon the caseload at DCFS, an entity that investigative journalism has already shown is badly stressed and in crisis. This bill is different in its amended form, but it still is just as harmful to the future of education in Illinois because it is harmful to this movement that I am so passionate about. Those who support this bill have argued to us that the bill is just a form, a simple administrative process that all the rest of the states are doing. Well, can I point out something that Illinois is a state that is a leader on a lot of justice issues, and I think we ought to be proud of that, not ashamed. Can I point out that all of those 38 states that are pointed to, not one of them has in the last 10 years passed a single law that makes homeschooling more restrictive, and many of them are passing legislation that makes homeschooling less restricted in their states. We are not an outlier, we are a leader, and we should be proud of it. The logic that this bill is going to just be a form wants us to assume that a simple administrative process cannot harm anybody, but that logic is flawed. It is why you cannot ask somebody about their race on a mortgage application. It's just a question. It is why an employer cannot ask a female employee if she plans to become pregnant. It's just an inquiry. It is why a movement has grown up all over this country to ban that little box on a job application that pre-screens for a criminal background. It's just a box. The reality is small administrative processes can be catastrophically burdensome for whole communities of disadvantaged peoples. We do not want this to come into play in our state. In order to receive this bill as what it is supposed to be, we have to believe that homeschool is, in principle, a large haven for child abuse and neglect, not in some particular. There will always be anecdotes that you can tell to scaremonger about any activity on the earth, from homeschooling to riding a bike. In order to receive this bill, we have to believe in principle that homeschooling is some kind of a haven for child abuse and neglect. And while there are those who may want you to believe that, there is no evidence that this is the case, and the best evidence that we do have suggests that homeschoolers are 40% less likely to die from abuse or neglect compared to the national average. We have to believe that putting a form in place is going to compel criminal abusers and violent sociopaths to change their behavior, to come forward and file their form, to put on their form that their curriculum is not teaching little girls and abusing little boys. Listen, I'm a pastor. I've studied theology and ethics and the human condition. And my heart grieves for every little child that is abused, and my heart sympathizes with an advocate and a legislator who has spent years as a vice chair of a child welfare committee. My heart sympathizes with the desire to reach for a quick fix to this kind of tragedy in our communities. But the reality is that child abuse and neglect is a large cultural problem, and it will only be solved by a large social and cultural project. There is no simple legislative solution. We would all sleep better at night if there were, and we would all gladly support a piece of legislation that could do that. But what I know about the human condition, what I believe your hearts are telling you about the human condition, is that there is no easy legislative fix. It won't fix that problem, but it will overburden homeschoolers across this state. But I'm talking to you in the particular about what I believe is the most hopeful thing that is happening in education in our state, and that is the number of parents who are stepping up to say, come hell or high water, I am going to do what it takes to secure a good and fruitful education for my child. That is happening in our state. That is happening in the city of Chicago. That is happening in the church community that I lead. And I am begging the members of this committee not to allow this bill to go forward because it will severely threaten that hopeful movement. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you on today.
Chair, do you want to just go to questions, or can I have a second to respond and make sure that the record is clear with some of the language through the testimony, whatever you would like me to do?
I think it's okay if you go ahead and respond to some of the pertinent points. I do believe the State Board of Education is also in the room and available to respond to certain points that were brought up. We want to make sure that the record is accurate. Thank you.
Thank you. So first I want to talk about the issue of criminal truancy that was brought up. I want to make the record clear, both Virginia and Wisconsin use their truancy statute, which is the same as ours, as their enforcement mechanism. So if the issue is you don't like the way the truancy statute is working, well, then we should go back and take a look at the truancy statute, but that's not this bill. So this bill is not the first in its nation. We would actually be the third that's actually using truancy law as an enforcement mechanism. There is nothing in this bill that states that a truancy officer would separate a child from a parent in a conversation. There's nothing in the bill that says that. So I want to be clear that the reason that language was added was at the request of homeschool families that I met with, as well as the Senate. So they felt it was important for people to meet kids so that kids would be able to tell how their experiences were going. And again, this was also at the request. I have been meeting with homeschool families, not just my constituents, frankly, more than, no, sir. Can you please turn your microphone? You'll get a chance to answer questions, but it's my turn. Thank you. So I want to be clear that I have spent a great deal of time, as represented, as chair has as well, meeting with homeschool families across the state of Illinois. And so this was actually a request that they made to have their children be able to talk about what they've learned, which I thought was a really interesting thing, because when you're doing it well and you're doing it in a way that kids are having these different kinds of experiences, our students, our kids want to tell you about it. I have a scarf in my office that a child made for me and talked about how they made, that was done in a way that was part of their math and grids and learning. And I thought, wow, what an interesting way to do that. So again, that was a change that was at the request of the Senate and homeschool families. The comment about, on page 3, about changing the definition of homeschool, that's incorrect. That was actually language that was from the original bill. It's also that we would be required to treat them as a private school, and so it's a little bit different there. And again, I think some of that language was about not full-time. The goal is to make sure we have an opportunity to see the kids, that we have an opportunity to the children who are being isolated, not the kids who are part of co-ops, not the kids who are part of other organizations where they're maybe in front of another mandated reporter, or in co-ops and different organizations where other adults are seeing kids. We're talking about kids who are being isolated. That kid like Zion, who was pulled from school and nobody saw him. Maybe that young man from Connecticut who was pulled from school in 4th grade, never to be seen or heard from again until he had to set his house on fire. That's who we're talking about, the children who are isolated. I want to make sure, again, the record is clear. Mr. Butler used the word school district quite a bit, and school district only applies to Chicago Public Schools. They are their own school district. They are their own truancy officer. This does not apply to our regular homeschool, those of us who live outside of Chicago. Those are school districts. Intermediate Service Center are Cook County schools that are not in CPS. Again, just let's make sure we have the record clear. I know that there were fiscal notes that were put on this bill and no fiscal impact, so I love that. And the assumption that there's a ballooning of a caseload to DCFS, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to respond to that in the nicest way, because I guess the assumption is we're trying to make sure that these are the kids that are being watched out and don't fall through the crack. So if we have an investigation because our bill made sure a child didn't fall through the cracks, well, Lord help us. It looks like we did our job, everyone. So, wow, I'm glad you support making sure that that happens. 38 states, everyone, 38 states have a declaration form. There is nothing in this bill that makes it more onerous than in the 38 states that are doing this. That is a fact. I'm ready for questions, Madam Chair.
Okay. I'd like to request that the State Board approach the table so that we can just explain on the record the differentiation between homeschools, co-ops, and private schools. I know there was some question, and I'd just like clarity. Thank you.
Good morning, Dana Stoger from the State Board of Education. If a student is in a home and receiving education outside of their own home, that would be considered a private school and they would need to be registered.
Okay. Moving on to questions from our committee. Representative Johnson, you were up first.
First, I do want to thank the pastor and his wife the past couple weeks for your testimony. I cannot wait to see what great things your 6 kids are going to accomplish in life. I'm looking forward to that. I spoke a couple weeks ago, and I didn't, about little Zion, who was in my district in Rock Island. And since I asked the sponsor a question here a couple weeks ago, I will tell you, we will all take images of her, and forever etched within me will be this vision of this little boy that was found months later in his Spider-Man pajamas dead. I will never, ever get that out of my mind. I will not. And I asked, or the fact that the mother basically said, the reason no one's going to know what happened here, I'm just going to tell them I'm homeschooling my child. And that is something that is really problematic for me as I continue to go back and forth on this bill. But, you know, I'm proud to serve. There's 118 of us in this chamber, and we all come from different places. And we've all gotten a lot of mail. I have gotten, I would say, a lot more in support of this legislation as opposed to early on as we get going. But I think we're all going to pick one particular issue that's important to me. And I will tell you, I'm a very, very proud girl dad. And the things, the letters that have the most impact on me are when I hear from young ladies now who were homeschooled who say, you know, when I was growing up, I was told that I was going to be educated. I could not be an engineer. I could not go into this field or this field. My parents told me that was unattainable for me. Is there anything in this bill that, because I believe that every child should reach their fullest potential, and I don't think anybody, including parents, should ever be able to mute that voice or mute that potential. Is there anything in this legislation that would create an environment in which these children that would happen to be in that environment can reach their fullest potential, such as pertaining to curriculum. Thank you.
Well, Representative, I mean, yes, there's mandated subjects that have to be taught. That is already currently in statute, and that's what it is. There's no curriculum requirement that has to, they don't have to take the curriculum from the public schools if that's what you're asking. There's nothing in the bill that requires it, but it does require that subjects, language arts, math, physical science, behavioral science, or I'm sorry, not behavioral science, excuse me, physical science, biological science, social science, fine arts, physical development, and health. All of those subjects would have to be taught.
So respectfully, am I able to speak at this time?
So, Mr. Butler, I'm going to allow you to make a statement, but I do want to point out that you were allowed to make a statement in opposition to the bill, and that you have done that. It is not your role then to act as the opponent at large to speak to any contradictory point that is made up. So you may make your statement, but I am going to somewhat caution some things.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to make a brief statement. I do just want to say that even according to what we just heard, all of the things that are said to be prevented by this bill are already against the law. And while, some of us may be able to make throwaway lines about the city of Chicago, that's where I live, it's where I do my work, it's what I think about, and I would ask this committee to think about it. And there's nothing in the bill that says separate a child, but there's nothing in the bill that says that you can't. And while some of us may be able to have a lot of trust in the bureaucrats who are going to administer this if it becomes the law, I just simply do not live in a world where that is a convenience that we have. This would need to be extremely precise. If we cannot assume, based on the way that laws have been enforced all throughout my lifetime in my ministry, I cannot sit here and say to you that I assume that every person who gets empowered with some new power in this law is going to come into my community and apply it according to the highest values and sort of the best view of justice and equity. It is not my experience. It is not the experience of my community, and it is why we worry so much about this legislation.
Delegate Mussman, may I say something in response to the representative's question as well?
Yes.
This is a concern that is near and dear to CRH's heart. We have many, many times women who were homeschooled reach out to us and tell us that they did not receive the same education as their brothers precisely because their parents told them that too much education was not something that was appropriate for girls. Today, CRHE is actually filing an amicus brief in the United States Supreme Court detailing stories, excuse me, of homeschooled women who were denied education equal to boys precisely because they are girls, in a case which brings up an issue before the Supreme Court in regard to education rights and educational equivalency. I would like to say that CRHE feels that this bill provides tools that are necessary to help young girls who are in this situation. It is very common that a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, or an older sibling who is now an adult and has left the home is aware that a minor girl inside that home is receiving an education that is not equivalent to what the boys in the home would receive or what boys would receive in a public school setting. We have had many, many, many situations where that concerned family member or family friend reaches out to the authorities and says, this girl is not receiving any math education or any science education. The only thing that she's allowed to do is learn homemaking. And because the authorities do not have the tools to respond to that situation, they do not have what this bill lays out, which is how a truancy officer would investigate a case of educational neglect and make sure that the students were receiving an education equivalent to what they would receive in the public school. Because they don't have that tool set, nothing happens. That has happened so many times. I have lost track of the number of older siblings and concerned family members and concerned family friends who have spoken to me crying because they cannot convince the parents to educate the girl, and they cannot convince the authorities to do anything about it because the authorities believe their hands are tied. The authorities will no longer believe their hands are tied after HB 2827 is passed, because there would be a mechanism for investigating educational neglect. And a girl who is just not receiving any higher math education whatsoever through high school, that girl is going to be deemed educationally neglected under this provision because she's not receiving any math education through grades 9 through 12, which is the concerns that we run into consistently. So for that reason, we do think that HB 2827 responds to your concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, are you finished?
I am. Thank you very much. Once again, thank you to everyone. But I will forever fight for Zion and for those little girls I'm talking about. I just want to make that clear. Thank you.
Representative Yanghor, you were next.
Thank you, Representative Costa-Howard. I just want to first thank you for all the work that you've put into this. I know it has taken a lot of time and has taken many, many meetings with your constituents, with probably constituents from around our constituents and from around the state. I want to also make sure to thank my constituents who have come to me to talk with me about how this bill would affect them. I have had the privilege over the past few weeks to meet with a number of homeschooling families in my district. It is clear that they are so caring, so competent in how they are approaching homeschooling, and being able to see some of the things that they're able to do with their families, with their students, has been really incredible. I'm glad that they have the option, the ability to be able to help their kids achieve their full potential. I want to make sure to thank you for listening to those constituents. The families that I have talked with, a number of the concerns that they have expressed, you have addressed in this amendment. And so thank you for listening to them and for making those changes.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Ellick, you were next.
Thank you so much. Representative, did you write this amendment?
Our staff, we worked on language together.
Okay. There's a lot of significant changes, but I think the very first page gave me a little hint as to maybe how we came to here today. And I maybe you didn't find it as significant as I did, but in the findings section was changed from the original bill, and they're rewritten. And numbers 3 through 7 all reference abuse or neglect. Number 4 says that, it conflates homeschooling. When abusers take students out of school under the false pretense of homeschool, it conflates legitimate homeschool with abuse and threatens the rights of those families who homeschool. I want to be clear that no one is doing that. The 130,000 people that have gone online and has said, you're wrong that you're conflating homeschooling with abuse. That's just wrong. And I was actually quite offended by the witness testimony today that everything is focused on abuse. And can I ask, those 38 states that have a variety of different things in place, is there abuse and neglect that goes on in those states as well?
Yes, there is.
So to say that we're going to fix abuse and neglect with this bill
if I may, let me rephrase
totally
that.
Incorrect.
Representative Ellick, would you like me to answer the question, or do you want to talk over me? I'm trying to answer your question. Thank you. I don't want to make an assumption about what's happening in another state. That's unfair of me. I'm a lawyer, and I'm not going to say that. Unfortunately, what we do know is things occur, right? We know that there are cases of abuse and neglect that occur across the nation. We have statutes on our books across the nation to address these issues. We have criminal statutes. We have civil statutes on our books, and yet things still happen. Our goal isn't to ignore that things are still going to happen, even if we have laws on the books. The goal is to keep fighting, to make sure that we're being intentional in trying to address the issues at hand. I listened to the concerns that people have brought me regarding abuse and neglect, and the irony that I found was, on one hand, I have people telling me to leave it, dump this on the doorstep of DCFS because that is their job. But if I'm being honest, I'm looking at a group of people sitting here right in front of me who don't vote for the department's budget, who make a lot of accusations about how horrible our DCFS department is. And I have to give it to Director Mueller, because she's done an amazing job of trying to address the concerns and issues within the Department of Children and Family Services. So one minute we can't dump every department, every problem at the department's doorstep, and then turn around and blame them for everything. We're trying to give people tools to make sure that they're addressing the issues at hand. And if we save a child, Representative, by giving another tool, don't we want to do that? Isn't that the goal? I think it is. And I know deep down, given the work that you've done on some of these issues, that you do feel that way. I'm not accusing homeschool parents of all being abusers. We know that's not the case. But what we're highlighting is the fact that we know from these cases where a child was removed from their school and they're dead. That's what happened. And we're putting another tool into place. This is not an accusation. We have a fact that we have a problem, and we're giving another tool to address these issues. Next question.
Well, that actually leads perfectly to my next question, because it's still in the findings, as you've discussed how important it is that DCFS have funding, you've also put in the findings, the state does not have an adequate system to further investigate signs of abuse. Number 6, the state's lack of process to investigate signs of abuse further delegitimizes homeschool as a viable alternative. Those are the fault of the system.
Let me answer that for you. So as you've heard in testimony repeatedly, and again, the way it works in an investigation with DCFS, if an investigator goes and there's an allegation of abuse, and the parent says, we're homeschooling, there's no mechanism for an investigator to talk to a child. They don't go, if the parent closes the door, there's nowhere for them to go. They're not in front of other mandated reporters, so the investigation essentially ends. So it's a tool, Representative, and that's what you want to give, are more tools.
Certainly, but guess what? When a parent says at that door, I'm homeschooling, I've filled out the form, it also ends. How does that really affect what's going on the other side of the door? A notification, declaration, whatever you want to call it, and I'll save that. That doesn't mean that we are catching the signs of abuse in the system that is failing the kids. The homeschoolers are not failing the kids, the system is.
Well, we know that we have cases, and again, you heard from at the last hearing testimony from one of our alumni who's actually doing the research on it, and so we do have cases, and I'm disappointed that you're unwilling to acknowledge that there are cases of neglect and abuse that go on in that situation. But again, I don't know what to say. We know that these things happen, but we also recognize that they don't always, that's not always the case. If you want to blame the system, then I'm looking forward to your yes vote on the budget that is going to actually be able to put those resources together. I mean, I'm excited to hear your vote and yes. This is going to be great, because I think that that's the thing. It's super easy for people to just bam, 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 all these departments, and yet you don't vote to actually give them the tools or the resources that they need. You just want to complain. Well, I'm not here to complain. I'm actually here to do something.
You actually did complain. It's your language. You just said you all work together on the bill. So you actually acknowledge that the monies that's gone into the system to DCFS has not solved the problem of abuse in Illinois.
Representative, as you know, we're always going to have to be addressing these issues. And I'm sure that, you've been briefed, because in adoption child welfare, we have been briefed numerous times on new models that they're working on to make sure that families have the resources. Because we've heard about the situation where somebody maybe doesn't have enough food, or they don't have a place to live, or the child doesn't have a jacket. Those aren't cases that necessarily need to come into the system. Those are the cases that we're relying on to make sure that we don't have to do that. And we work on getting them the resources that they need, whether they're through their communities, which includes their local churches and their local community organizations. And those are the things that we're doing. And I'm sure that Representative Reich will be able to brief you on SAFE model that's being implemented. And again, it's about making sure that we get these resources out there. I mean, are there other questions about the actual fundamental pieces of the bill that you have?
Yes, I actually
Okay.
do. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Why
No
did you
problem.
change the language from a declaration form to a notification form?
It was a recommendation that was requested.
What's the difference in a notice or a declaration?
It was a request that was made, Representative. You
From
wanted us to
whom?
listen to people, and so we did.
By any chance, you know what, I'll move on past that. I think we need to go back to, because I'm not sure I'm clear on the co-ops, the homeschool co-ops, and Dana, you might be able to, because you stated before. So 2 families that get together to combine resources on homeschooling are now a private school? Is that what I'm understanding? And they have to register?
Under this act, a homeschool is defined as a school that is for one family, and if multiple families come together and create a new school, in that sense, that would be considered a private school.
And they now have to register?
They would need to register annually and attest that they are providing education.
Interesting. It speaks to administrative burden. And by the way, I think you mentioned that these fiscal notes were filed and there was no fiscal cost. That's actually not true at all. There was a bit of a fiscal cost to ISB that they stated, but it also stated we cannot estimate the expense to the other various levels of the education system. When we were here previously, the ROE Association stated that there would be a cost. I actually see this as increasing the cost to the ROE, and I don't have an estimate of that. Do you have an estimate of the cost that the ROE Association or the ROEs would incur for the work that they're going to be doing on these forms?
The state board can only estimate costs for us, and we estimated those costs at $1,500.
Understand it, but so
I'm
you
sorry,
have no
Dana,
estimate.
what was that, $1,500?
So you have no
7500?
estimate, excuse
Okay,
me,
thank you.
Representative, so you have no estimate of the amount that the ROEs will be incurring at this point in time?
We cannot make that estimate, no.
Is there anything that's going to be in the budget that you speak so highly of that's going to reward the ROEs for this voluminous paperwork that they're going to be administering here? Anyone?
I believe, what was in the budget for the truancy piece from last year? I think there was an increase, 12 million?
Yeah, $12 million in the ROE budget specifically for truancy-related purposes.
But not for filling out a form or receiving a form and making sure that the form went to the right place, correct?
Representative,
That was
I
last
believe
year's
that the
money.
forms are able to be received electronically so that there's no personnel time managing them hands-on. I believe that is part of the change. I just wanted to go ahead and put that on the record. Can we move on to further questions and not belabor the piece of paper?
She asked for questions about the bill or the amendment itself, so that is where I was going with that, Chair. Thank you very much. I think actually, though, I maybe will just wrap up with, everybody sounds like they've heard from all these wonderful people that are in support of the previous bill or the amendment. I've heard from 0, and I've actually heard 130,000 plus people that have filed witness slips over this course of this bill for opposition. These are the real families sitting here today. These are the real families out there that are saying, why are you doing this to us when we are providing a wonderful, loving service to our children, raising them up with maybe a religious foundation, an educational foundation? We are not the problem here. I am going to support those families. We're going to support those families. And it's a shame that you can't see that they should have a voice in this process too. So I'll let my colleagues speak.
Thank you. Representative Willar, I think you were next.
Thank you. How long have you been working on this amendment?
It's hard to give you an estimate because I would argue that when you're working on a bill, you're always working on a bill. And so even when you file an amendment, there might be language that you're still working on that might not give it. We've been working on this for quite some time.
Well, it was just interesting that you drop at the 11th hour.
Representative,
have you talked to any homeschool experts in the process of doing this bill, doing this amendment?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how we define, and my definition of expert might be different than yours. And in fact, I've heard from a number of families who have been homeschooling for quite some time, both in my district and around the state and around the country, who, in fact, we had an officer in our office who moved from Ohio to the area, who is a homeschooler. And our bill is what they do in Ohio, and he didn't seem to have any idea. I would say him and his family are pretty well versed in multiple states. So yes, I've talked to a number of people who are doing it and doing it well and don't see any issues.
The reason I asked that is the only expert that I see that you've specifically talked to and that is here is the people on the Zoom, and they're the ones that also think that people that support traditional American values are parental rights extremists. So I want to talk.
I'm sorry, are you re-victimizing a group of homeschool alumni who have come forward to tell their stories?
Am I victimizing?
Well,
No,
you're suggesting.
I'm not victimizing. I'm just pointing out the fact that you're getting expert advice from
I didn't
one
say that,
side and not the other.
Representative.
We had. Did you speak to the homeschool legal defense group that testified so eloquently here?
I don't.
Were
They have
involved,
never.
Were they involved in a negotiation?
Representative, would you like me to answer your question, or do you want to talk over me?
No, I would like you to answer the
Thank
question.
you. Nobody from the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund has reached out to speak to myself or the chair about the bill. I would also like to point out to everyone that it is the individual who testified at the last hearing is also one of the co-authors of Project 2025. And I think it's important for people to understand, if you look at any of their propaganda, I would also remark that they are all about school choice. And so when I have never heard from them directly other than him testifying here. Or being on a, an interview.
If you want to talk about propaganda, the group that you got in here has an entire tab on their website dedicated to parental rights extremists. But I want to talk about the form. The form, is it limited to what's listed under the shalls and the mays, or is it still subject to?
Nope, we removed that language, Representative. That was a request that was made, and we removed that language.
Okay, so part of the maze is that they would include some of the curriculum. Is that a may on the part of ISB making this form, or is that a may on the part of the parent filling out the form?
Yeah.
Those would be considered optional on the form.
Okay. So ISB is going to create a form where all of the shalls are going to be filled out for sure, and then there's a section that if the parents choose to do the maze, they can do the maze, but they don't have to do the maze.
That is correct.
Okay, good. All right. And on this truancy stuff, the fear is Mr. Butler alluded to it here. Are we setting up a situation where a truancy officer would meet with a minor child of somebody that, for instance, just forgot to fill out the form or filled out the form incorrectly? Go through the mechanics of how that meeting with the minor child would take place. Where is it taking place? What rights do the parents have in that situation?
Well, there's nothing that diminishes the rights that parents currently have in terms of meeting with the child. Again, this language was included at the request of the Senate and at the request of homeschool families who thought that was a way to, sir, you can shake your head. I'm just explaining to you the requests that have been made to my office. And so I can't give you a lockdown of what each process is because, as I know is important to you, we have local discretion. So truancy officers and each individual ROE have been given the opportunity to make those decisions about how they're going to handle that. So I do not think it would be prudent for any of us to say direct the type of meeting, shall we say, that would be required. In fact, I actually think, I'll use myself as an example. When I do my meetings with kids in my role as a court-appointed guardian ad litem, I always want to do them in a place where a child is most comfortable, whether that's their home, sometimes it's their school, sometimes I've actually met kids at a playground with somebody just to meet, because that's where a kid is comfortable. So I don't want to tell somebody else how to do their job. I want them to decide in your district, in your community, how they would meet with a child might be something that's different than in mine. And I want to respect that. It's important for us to be able to respect that.
Okay, well, what if you're having trouble facilitating that meeting? This is, it's just so, it's so wide open. I think we need clarity on how these truancy officers are going to approach a kid that's not in a public setting. How does that happen?
So Representative, I want to make sure that I'm clear for the record, and as we keep taking notes and we keep working on this bill, would you like us to actually state exactly when, where, within how many days a meeting would be taking place? I mean, we can do that potentially if that's your request. I mean, for example, Representative, you would like us to say something to the effect of that a truancy officer shall meet with a child with or without parent in an office. Would you like me to describe this, the size of the office? I mean, again, I'm trying to give flexibility. I think that's a more prudent thing. But if you would like me to make that change, I am more than happy to make that change for you.
No, I mean, do these kids, do they get an attorney? Are their parents?
They're not, I mean,
are their parents
again, in the
required
bill,
to be present?
there's nothing that says that they cannot. Would you like us to add that to the bill, sir?
It may give a little clarity.
I'm asking very specifically, Representative.
Okay.
Would you like me, Representative, could you answer my question? Because I'd like to know if you want us to put that in there. I just want to make sure that we're clear.
I think that we need to talk about it, and I think we need to clarify.
I think that's a question.
I think that we need to make sure that we're respecting both the rights of the student and of the parent.
Absolutely. That's why I'm asking you. Do you want me to put that in the bill?
I mean, Mr. Butler, what's your lack of clarity on this that you would like addressed?
So, I think when we talk about with or without the parent, that is very problematic. The meeting is to determine if there is cause for an investigation, and there's nothing in that language that says that you cannot have the meeting without the parent, because right now it says you're meeting with the child. And again, I just don't live in a space where the families that I work with are filled with trust in the local school system and many of the local bureaucratic systems that they are going to have the best interest of that parent and that family in mind, which is why I must continue to press on this fact that it feels onerous, and it will almost certainly lead to harassment, over-investigation, demonization, criminalization, if nowhere else, definitely in the spaces where I am.
Yeah. So if I may respond, sure. I want to point out a couple of things. What we know is that, for example, and I know you'll be supportive of this, if there is a hotline call where a doctor in a hospital where there's an injury, a child is interviewed and spoken to so that doctor can determine what happened and whether or not they need to make that call. We want a child to be able to say what happened. And so we left it open in this bill, but that's sort of the concept that we were thinking of in an abuse investigation or an injury to a child that went to a hospital. I think we'd all agree that we would want that child to be interviewed and have a conversation with them to determine whether or not, a recommendation and what needs to happen. We wrote this in a way with that in mind, but I guess we cannot have it both ways. So we can either be proscriptive and say exactly how and the setting and such that it needs to be, or we leave it to local control and discretion, which I know is something that this front row feels very strongly about. So I can't do both. I need to decide one or the other. So tell me what you would like it to say, Representative.
Well, I mean, all I can say is that you have a clear history of pushing bills that don't pass judicial scrutiny. So I would like for things to be a little more.
I would really like if we could leave the personal comments out of this testimony. Representative, I believe
that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
On both sides, I would like us to tighten this up, and we do need to keep moving. We have gotten a bit of an extension, but I believe that we have at least 3 more speakers, and we need to keep this tight.
Yeah.
Are you finished with your line of questioning, Representative?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Could you please speed things along? There are other people that are waiting.
I've been thinking that for the last 2 weeks that we've been waiting on this to come back. There's lots of abuses that are taking place in the government school systems, and you know, these abuses are taking place by basically the more educated and the more credentialed folks, and you know, the fear is on this. Those are the kind of people that are going to be more likely to fill out this kind of form and do that kind of stuff. And you know, this bill does absolutely nothing to protect the people in those situations. What is a piece of paper at the ROE going to do to protect somebody in an abusive situation?
Representative, I'm a little confused by your question because I don't get what you're asking me.
Well, there's 1,000 reported cases of abuse in CPS. There's 2 recent reports of abuse.
Are you referring to sexual abuse? I just want to make sure.
Sexual abuse in DuPage County, your home county. Well, and those are the type of people that are going to you know, fill out a form like this, and they're going to stash it in a file in the ROE. This bill does 0 to protect these people. If you want to protect these people, you know, make a child abuse and neglect bill, put it into DCFS, and leave the homeschool folks alone. I don't see the connection.
Sure. That's troubling given the ProPublica report and the number of cases and testimony we've had. Representative, if you may, you asked me a question and I am trying to answer. Again, you can talk over me or you can give me a second to answer and you can ask me another question. Sure. So I acknowledge, and I know Representative Ellick worked on face law because that is something that we are all very concerned about. And I agree with you in the fact that we have too many cases. It is horrible. It is awful. I cannot say enough negative things about situations of abuse that is going on in our schools, okay? But I want to make sure that you understand one of the requests that we made because of concerns that were raised was that now, if you have been convicted of a sex offense, we remove that language. So you can still homeschool your kids if you have been convicted of a sex offense. Unless you tell me otherwise, we were hearing what you said about convictions of crimes and parents attesting to stuff on that they have never been convicted of those things. But now we removed that at the request of all of you to change that declaration form. So would you like us to put that back in, that if you have been convicted of a sex offense, you can't homeschool?
The courts, there's already mechanisms in there for the courts.
No, Representative, there's not. So I'm asking you.
The administration from on high has asked that we put ourselves on a timer and we wrap this up.
Got it.
I'm going to remind everyone that should this bill proceed, there will be many opportunities for us to share continued feedback in the Senate if further amendments would like to be made. This is a living process, and I'm going to move on to the next questioner. And again, I need you to keep it concise, ask a question that is relevant to the bill, answer as quickly as possible. We need to leave the rhetoric out of it. Representative Niemerg, for a quick question.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question on logistics of this. So as a parent that wants to pull their child out of public schools, how do I know I need to fill out this form?
They will be available on the ROE website. The hope would be that a school district would make sure that that parent knows that that child has been removed from school, that would be the case.
So I would need to go, would the school notify me that I need to fill out this form, or would I need to figure that out for
Well,
myself?
remember, Representative, if you just pull your child from school and they don't show up again, that's truancy. So that would be part of.
But the school will notify me that if I say, hey, I want to pull my kid to do homeschooling, the superintendent, principal, whomever would say, okay, but you need to fill out this form and get it to the ROE. Will that happen?
That is the intention.
Okay. So what if, is that in the amendment or in the bill for that to occur?
I think that is the thing that is currently going to be understood. Perhaps that is a detail we can add. Actually, many schools already voluntarily have a separation agreement form that
on that I'm sure most homeschool families are quite aware of what is happening right now. But we are working on that. We are working through that issue. JCAR, there are rules that will be promulgated as well, but we are working on that, and we will add that to our list of language that maybe needs to be tightened up in a future amendment.
Okay. And as far as notification, so if I fail.
Oh, I'm sorry, Representative, just to update you, current homeschoolers would have about 1.5 years to make sure that this is taken care of, but we will work on that amendment as well.
Now, if I fail to report this form in 3 days, who notifies the truant officer that I'm truant and didn't fill this form out?
The Regional Office of Education will be aware, since remember, that's where it lies now, that's where the form's
So the ROE will tell the truant officer, hey, this form hasn't been filled out. Now, is there any mechanisms of, hey, a phone call, something saying, you didn't fill this form out, it's been 3 days, can you get this done for us, or does the truant officer just show up?
Nope, that's the intention, again, is we just want people to be compliant. We're not trying, there's no gotcha involved, we just want people to be compliant. So that's why the bill builds that in, to give people that opportunity.
So a truant officer won't show up at somebody's house if they fail the 3-day requirement. How does that work? How does the truant officer
I can't
show
tell
up?
you that, because that would depend on the individual Regional Office of Education and how they decided to proceed.
So as it's written, the ROE is saying, okay, this person is in violation. The ROE, after 3 days, can just send the truant officer to that home. They have the authority to do that.
I'm sorry, I thought the chair was about to say something. That, I believe, that is in the bill, yes.
Okay. And also to kind of go back to just real quick, some of the language I know you alluded to on page 40, Amendment 2, the truant officer or county truant officer notified of a homeschooling violation of Section 30 of the Homeschool Act shall meet with a child or children complained of and make the initial determination. I know you talked about, changing language in there if we recommend it, but I guess my concern is if this form, if I fail to fill out this form, get it to the ROE, 3 days have lapsed, the ROE calls a truant officer, they come to my home, and they conduct a investigation, interview my child without me present, the way it's written, I have very serious concerns with that.
I understand that there's nothing in the bill that says the parent cannot be there, so let's remember that. Again, it's an opportunity this is that tool to make sure a child didn't fall through the cracks and be able to make sure that that child is okay.
Okay.
Representative, we need to move on. Clerk, we have members that need to move on to other activities. We are going to move to a vote and then come back to very quickly finish our questioning. So Representative Johnson moves to recommend that floor amendment number 2 to House Bill 2827 be adopted. Clerk, could we please begin the roll with Representative Blair Sherlock?
Blair Sherlock?
Yes. Could we also question Representative Johnson? Do you need to?
Johnson?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Representative Spence, we'll let you finish. Representative Mason, you have 3 minutes for a question.
Thank you. I'll be shorter than that. I don't know if this is a question for the representative or for Dana, but there are 38 states that already have a notification or declaration form in place, correct? Yes. Okay. I have been delving into that and researching, and I have not found anything blowing up, anybody complaining of undue hardship, any newspaper articles, any research articles, nothing about, oh my gosh, homeschool is collapsing because they have to fill out a form once a year. Are you aware of any situations like that?
We are not, no.
Thank you. Oh.
Okay, are you finished
It's
with
a
your
form.
questioning, Representative Mason? Excellent. Representative Swanson, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, and it's an important matter that we're discussing here. It's too bad we got to be on a time strain. Couple questions. First, a comment. I was really upset to hear the presenter on the Zoom say something to the effect that parents hide their crime when homeschooling children. That really, that hit pretty hard. I think that was way off base. Also made a comment about its money being made by curriculum organizations, by those selling products. No, it's about safety, love, family, and God for those families. Homeschooling is what it's about. It's not putting money in the pockets of people writing curriculum. And also exception from people out of state telling us how to raise our children here in Illinois. That offended me. But I would like to ask Pastor Butler, you made a comment. I think this should be brought up and you given the opportunity to maybe expound on it. You said this demonizes homeschool families and specifically attacks the Black and Latino communities, movements, grassroots to save children from public schools, with empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. I try to understand why you say that, and I think I understand, but could you expound on what the true meaning behind that is? I think that's important.
Absolutely. It's very similar to the representative who had to leave. I won't ever get the first face of Shamari Salter. He was the first young man who was gunned down in Chicago who I had to funeralize. And the number of faces representative now are too many and too painful even to try to recall. And I know that the difference between me and those young men that I funeralized is that I happened to get on a route to select enrollment schools and these types of minor options. What you have in Chicago, I can't tell you about all over the state. I can't tell you about 40 years or anything like that. I can tell you about Chicago. I can tell you about Black and brown communities. I can tell you that what is going on there is that people are trying to save their children's lives. And we too, what my wife is doing at We School, she's trying to give people tools. They're called homeschooling tools. And if you were telling those parents to look in the face of a public school system that is run by folks who do not believe in this kind of choice and trust them with these tools that this bill is going to create, we cannot do that. We do not believe that it is going to do anything except for short circuit this movement that I think has given a lot of people hope.
Thank you. And by categorizing these schools, this is probably a question more for ISBE, by privatizing the schools and calling them co-ops now, does that establish a gun-free zone around those schools?
I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Don't have that answer at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of an important point too. I mean, what's that mean to us? And just to highlight the 37,562 people who signed witness slips, thank you very much. We're listening to you and we're trying to get this fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Croak, you are our final speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Representative, I do want to say I appreciate the fact that you are taking a lot of the advocates into consideration with this amendment. And I actually want to say I appreciate the fact that you waited this long to bring an amendment, because I think you were waiting as long as possible to get feedback, to have something that was as fully cooked as it possibly could be. And even the fact that you're sitting here still taking input and willing to work specifically on this truancy officer issue, because I will say, as my understanding, and I cannot speak for a situation that Mr. Butler, in like a situation that he may experience or within his community, my understanding is a truancy officer would really only have a situation where they would pull a child away from a parent if there was immediate danger. And even then, I don't know if they would have that ability, because they're not really technically a peace officer, a police officer. But again, if someone feels emboldened to do that, I can't speak to that scenario. So if that's something that you're even considering, I appreciate that you're taking that feedback right now. I noticed that the Catholic Conference of Illinois is not here. Did you work with them on this language?
Yes, we did, and I'm sorry, Rabbi, you're here, so I'm going to gesture to our friend, Rabbi Shlomo Shroka. We met with them, and this is actually the language that they suggested, and so we took their suggestion, and yes, because this is what their request was as well. And I think, it's fair to say that if a parent is paying for private school, they're not necessarily they're being seen. But yes, this was language that was directly given to us by those organizations, and the Catholic Conference was one of them.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I do also believe in my child getting a religious education. I send my child to the local Catholic school, and that's very important to me. But I also believe in the bill that you're trying to present here, and I appreciate you taking the feedback of the Catholic schools into consideration. And obviously, Rabbi is not part of the Catholic schools, but represents a large contingent of the private religious schools. I do actually want to point out something that Representative Alex said, because I think it's important to highlight that a piece of paper is not necessarily going to prevent some of the atrocities that we're hearing about. You mentioned that this is a tool. This is a tool, and it's not a magic. It seems like something that is very minimal that could just prevent one child from being abused. And I think that's very important that we remember. And again, this is like 99.9999% of the children that are being homeschooled are being done in a loving, caring, beautiful environment by the most amazing parents and people that the state has. But it's this one opportunity, this one tool amongst a larger toolbox that we have. So thank you for your work on this bill. I very much appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to voting yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We've had a very robust discussion and question and answer series, and in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead with our roll.
Representative, may I just make 3 sentences?
Quick.
One, if there was any evidence of a disproportionate impact in our communities, we would see that. The Homeschool Legal Defense Fund publishes a notice every single week about what it is that they do in legal cases around the country. And there is not a single case that has been reported of a disproportionate impact. That is not true. It is fear-mongering. And 2, Carmen, we see you in the alumni. We see you, we hear your stories, and we will continue to fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Clerk, could you please continue calling our roll?
Ellick?
No.
Mason?
Yes.
Niemerg?
No.
Swanson?
No.
Willauer? No. Yang Roar?
Yes.
Croak?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Costa-Howard?
Yes.
There being 9 votes in favor, 4 voting opposed, floor amendment number 2 to House Bill 2827 is recommended for adoption and will be favorably reported to the House floor. There being no further business to come before the Education Policy Committee today, the House will stand at recess to the call of the chair. Thank you, everyone, for the good work today.